Major funding for Ice Storm 98, Reclaiming the Forest, was made possible by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Forest Service, caring for the land and serving people.
For almost 2 weeks in early January 1998, much of the North Country was covered in a blanket of ice. As much as 4 inches covered everything from power lines to tree branches. Some things held up to the extreme weight. Most did not. People were plunged into darkness as a state of emergency gripped the region. It would take weeks, in some cases months, to restore power and clear the roads of fallen debris. To most people, the ice storm of '98 is long gone. A distant, icy memory of overpriced generators and seemingly endless yard cleanup. But to others, its effects are still painfully evident. And in the once thriving forests, woodlots, and sugar bushes, this powerful force of nature will be felt for decades to come. How will the forest recover? What can be done to speed the recovery process? How has it affected forest industries such as maple syrup production? And what can the average landowner expect in the years and decades to come? Ice storms happen every year across the northern United States and Canada. Rain becomes super cool when it falls from the warm air aloft through layers of colder air below. This supercooled rain then freezes on contact with surfaces that are at or below the freezing point. Ice formation generally ranges from a trace to 1 inch in accumulation. However, during the first week of January in 1998, the North Country was devastated by the worst winter ice storm on record. A series of storms that lasted for days left up to 4 inches of ice on everything from power lines to automobiles. Federal disaster areas were declared in 37 counties, and more than 24 deaths were attributed to the storm and its after effects. Some areas were without power for 2 weeks. This, in the middle of a North Country winter where temperatures dropped well below zero.
This is the largest storm event in NYSEG's history. Absolutely nothing in the history of the company or any of the New York State utilities has ever come close to the magnitude of this storm. We suffered damage to our electric lines, both distribution and transmission, to the tune of about 1,850 miles of line on the ground, which one of our engineers equated to a trip from here to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we needed to rebuild that, which we were fortunate enough to do in about 2 weeks' time. That included about 2,100 utility poles broken and approximately 800 to 1,000 transformers destroyed, but a massive amount of damage for sure.
As much damage as NYSEG faced, it ultimately paled in comparison to the magnitude and severity of destruction the trees and woodlands of the area experienced.
The damage that we saw once we got here was far more than we ever anticipated. It looked like a war zone out here the first time we came here.
It was as if a bomb had been dropped because there was nothing. It was just devastated. I mean, it was broken, it was turned over, it was incredible.
Over 17 million acres of forest were damaged in northern New England and upstate New York. Some trees carried 40 times their weight in ice. First, the limbs fell, then entire trees bent or snapped in half. 25 million cords of wood, or 3 billion board feet of timber, were damaged or destroyed. Enough wood to build 300,000 homes. Meteorologists have called the storm a 100-year event, but what many people don't realize is that it may take that long for our forests to recover.
Recovery time for the northern forests is going to be measured in a very, very long, we're talking decades. The massive amount of damage is obviously something that none of us have ever seen and none of these woodland areas have ever experienced in recorded history before. We're expecting that the immediate damage is going to be 5 to 15, 20 years out.
The effect on maple producers, for instance, there are maple producers whose sugar bushes have been damaged for at least a generation, if not more, and they won't get their sugar bushes back up to production levels for a generation, 20, 30, maybe 40 years in some cases. So that, from the perspective of people, has been quite a devastating effect.
This unprecedented natural disaster has left many woodlot owners wondering where to start. What should, or more importantly, should they not do to their heavily damaged forests?
It's not the time for the landowner to jump in there and try to recover their losses without professional guidance. In many situations, whether it be on the city streets, in the backyards, or in the woodlands, hasty action creates more damage than the storm did itself. So what we're trying to promote is still to maintain an even pace. Don't panic about this situation. Your woodlot might look devastated, but through the eyes of a professional, there may be ways that you can recover some of the losses while trying to encourage growth on species that weren't damaged, but trying to build up your resources again without going in there and rampantly cutting or accidentally cutting something that really could have survived.
Proper forest management, however, is not a black and white issue. There are many variables that need to be considered when creating a viable management plan. For some answers, let's turn to DEC forester Bruce Barnard and private consulting forester Herb Boyce.
There are no bulletproof ideas of how to manage any individual woodlot. The severity is different between woodlots. The species mixes are different. And Mother Nature keeps throwing us curveballs as we go through since the ice storm. Last year being so wet and having record rainfalls all summer, a lot of these trees that would have probably died, that were extremely severely damaged, are surviving into this year. But at the same time, a lot of these trees we expect are still going to die in certain areas. But we are still learning, and the biggest thing we've been stressing to our clients is caution and restraint and a wait-see attitude. Certain forests we are trying to cut, and we're trying to cut as quick as possible because we know we're going to lose a lot of timber and a lot of value. While other ones, we want to wait and see this fall, see how they make it through this summer. We watched how they made it through last year. If we don't start seeing a lot of dying timber, we're going to wait another year.
One of the big problems we have is that people get excited and have been excited, and here we are a year and a half or so, well, less than that, after the ice storm. And a couple things to remember is the ice storms happen. It's a natural process. Trees have lived with ice storms for decades, not maybe as bad as this one in our memory anyways. But they do have some ability to recover. And we want to get across that just because you have damaged trees is not a reason just to come in and liquidate your woodlot. Those trees, a lot of those trees can recover If you go in and just salvage some of the trees, a high quality tree that the logger wants, and he damages other trees that are left, those trees then degrade in quality and maybe have more damage from the logging than they had from the ice storm.
What the ice storm has done is forced us into cutting. Normally what we can do is if the markets are poor for any product that we plan on harvesting, with forest we can just say, not this year. We put it off for a year, half year, 6 months, 3 years. The low-grade markets are fairly poor right now. They weren't anything great coming into the ice storm. As soon as the ice storm hit, as of last summer, we saw pulp prices drop anywhere between 5 and 25%. Plus the rest of the world is in a recession. So that's drawn down some prices. Depending on the severity of the damage and whether they need to be cut at this time, some clients right now we're telling them to hold off. It's not severe enough. These trees will survive. There's no reason to put timber on a market that doesn't want it when we can wait and get a better price.
Okay, here we have an American beech that is showing a prime example of epicormic branching in a crown that was severely damaged by the ice storm. As you can see, most of the large limbs were broken out of this crown. Beech is a very strong wood, but fairly brittle when cold, and the ice storm took it out. Well, it has put out, through buds that are underneath the bark and that are usually dormant, new branches or epicormic branching. This happens in many of our hardwood species and some of our softwood species. When sunlight hits the bark, warms it up, because of all the damage around, the crowns are gone and so forth, we get this branching as a defensive mechanism to try to keep this tree alive. This will grow. Obviously, it's not the best branching that we could have and so forth. It's weaker. It's probably not as efficient as a normal branching pattern, but it will allow this tree to survive. This tree, and this is pretty amazing for beech to have it like this. Hard maple and so forth usually does it, red maple. This is an indicator that maybe this tree won't grow a lot now, but if we were faced to have a harvest this year or 5 years from now, and the markets aren't good this year, this would allow us to at least keep that tree alive without too much staining in our important portion of the bowl, so that we could recover our value and not have to cut it now.
We also have over here a hard maple sapling that was broke off during the ice storm, and here the epicormic branching is occurring. Some of these are small older branches that have resprouted and they're doing well. This tree doesn't look so great, but as we look at this tree, as it grows for the next 100 years, we may not even be able to tell there was an ice storm that occurred and did severe damage. It may become a wolfy tree and have very little economic value also. The biggest problem with these sprouts is they are very weak, as Bruce had mentioned. They do break off, so additional ice storm damage will, or heavy snows, some of these will be losing a lot of these branches over the next few years until they finally grow into the bark or the tree grows around them and supports them more.
One of the things I'd like to mention about this site is you look around, there isn't a lot of slash or limbs on the ground. This job had a chip job to clean up the tops as the trees were harvested, so it looks cleaner than normal. We get a lot of questions about that, whether people should just go in and pay people to chip in their woods or whatever, and since the chip market right now is almost nil, there are advantages to leaving tops and brush in the woods. It's unsightly, yes, but ecologically, it provides a trellis shading pattern for regeneration that's cutting up. So as in a nursery where they'll put trellises above nursery beds to give you partial sunlight, the same thing happens on the forest where it'll give partial shade to the ground. The soil stays cooler and moister, which is the most important thing. So it does have an important function to leave the slash there. Maybe you want to clear out roads and trails for recreational use, but just having it there, in 5 or 6 years it'll be going down to only large branches, but in the meantime it does provide an important function.
I guess the most important thing to remember is, from a landowner's perspective, is get as much information as you possibly can. Get good information, talk to professional foresters in how you should proceed before you start managing or start harvesting, or totally make up your mind of what you're going to do, because there are a lot of options that are out there, and there is right and wrong answers and procedures to do. We're still learning the process, and what is best to do we'll know for the next ice storm, hopefully. But for the most part, there's a lot of wrong decisions being made out there. There are a lot of landowners that are harvesting trees that probably don't need to be harvested. There's a lot of landowners that aren't harvesting that may need to.
We've been talking about harvesting, timber harvesting, and big scale jobs, big equipment in here, but a lot of times having a forester, a state forester, whatever, come in, give you an idea of what can be done. A lot of that can be done, if you like to putter around in your wood lot, a lot of that can be done with just a chainsaw and techniques that for just thinning and clearing, getting trees down that need to come down, cleaning up for aesthetic reasons, and stuff that the landowner can do himself on his own small woodlot. He doesn't have to bring in a logger or anything else in a lot of cases. But the professional advice is probably the most important thing. As Herb said, some of the wood that's gone to the mill shouldn't have gone to the mill. It was harvested because of a reaction to a crisis that really didn't exist on that woodlot. And we needed to back up, get some advice, what's going to be proper with your landowner objectives in mind for that woodlot. We have to put that all together to come up with a plan, and that's a landowner's plan.
Woodlot owners were not alone in facing the damage caused by the ice storm. Maple producers were hit especially hard because optimum sugarbush management favors thinning the stand to obtain larger crowns on the remaining trees. The large space between the trees offered no support for the crowns heavy with ice. The damage was so intense, many producers initially predicted a total loss of production. Just days after the storm, Earl Parker of West Chazy, New York, was not optimistic.
And we could hear the trees crashing. It sounded like, some sounded like thunder, some sounded like gunshots. We could hear them just crunching and crashing and going down. My wife and I just sat there and we didn't know what to do. This is kind of tough. I feel we have damage to 100% of our trees. Percentage-wise, we've lost, I don't know. For this year, we've lost total production. And we've got to make some changes in our life. We've got kids to support. And anyhow, so this is kind of tough. We've got many, many years of work here.
But it's hard to keep a maple producer out of the woods. And a year later, Earl is up and running again.
And then after spring came, we decided, we took another look at our trees and we thought there could be a future. So we've been watching them. We had ideal conditions last summer and we started immediately last June. We've gone out and we've strung up about 45, 50 miles of new tubing. So we're thinking there is a future here and we're gonna make a future out of it. We're coming back. The foresters from DEC have advised us not to tap this year to give the trees a better chance to heal, and probably they're right. But, as I said before, maple producers are kind of stubborn and set in their ways, and we, as a family, we came together and we decided that we were not going to hurt these trees by putting one little tap hole like that in the tree, and that we're going to get production, and I still think we're all right. It would have been better to let them heal, I guess, but this is our living. We got to do something. We got to do something. We can't sit back and starve. Simple as that.
This year we didn't drill a hole. First year since 1852 that this bush was untapped.
Just a mile down the road, however, Bob and Dick Atwood have a very different management plan.
Well, we decided not to tap this year. It all came about one year, one day last summer. We were in the woods and we were just looking up at the trees, and I think Bob could read my mind and I was reading his, and we both we agreed that we should not tap. We should give the trees a year off. Cornell had been telling us not to tap because we would be wounding the tree. Another wound to the tree, it's stress on the tree. Even though it's a small wound, it has a stressful factor involved, and we decided that the trees needed a year off. As much sap as in the tree needed, and we didn't need it, so we thought we would get along without it.
The uncertainty about what to do with an ice-ravaged sugar bush is due partly to the lack of reliable information on severe ice storm damage. Cornell University is making sure that when this happens again, producers will know more about what to do in their sugar bush.
We have 60 plots in 12 locations, and we're trying to get just a baseline data for ice storm damage in sugar bushes. We hope that this information is going to be able to provide us with better management practices, guidelines for maple producers in the future if these kinds of events should occur again. It's hard. We're not going to know whether a good portion of these trees are going to recover or not, but there are things for people to look for. You want to look at the age. Younger trees are going to have an easier time recovering, restoring themselves from badly damaged areas. What the health of the tree was before. If the tree was healthy before the storm, it's going to have a much easier time recovering after. If it was already dealing with disease or insect damage, if the area had a bad drought, any one of these factors can make it much harder for the tree to recover. Just like our bodies, when you're under stress and then you have another stress, you get a cold, it's harder to recover from that. Trees are similar in that way. Another factor is just the site itself. If you have the site that's not especially suited for the tree to begin with, and then it's damaged badly in an ice storm again, that's going to be a factor that can make it harder for it to recover. And finally, if the broken branches were spread throughout the tree, a more balanced damage on the tree is going to have an easier time recovering. If it's all on one side, the tree is going to have a harder time. But again, be very aware of your trees and be patient with them and patient with yourself, because it's just going to take some time.
There's an old saying that every cloud has a silver lining. And the silver lining to the ice storm of '98 is that more people are now thinking, talking, and learning about forest ecosystems than ever before. Some schools, such as Peru Central, are even going on field trips to heavily damaged areas for some first-hand experience.
All of the students can relate to the ice storm. They all experience the ice storm, and each of them has their own individual stories, and now they're going to bring that experience to the forested situation and assess what happened to the forest during that same natural disturbance. Oftentimes we don't think about how things work until they're damaged or until they're broken. And the ice storm has caused people to think about forests and how forests work, the plant communities that are here, the animal communities that are here. People are thinking and talking about forests since the ice storm, because of the ice storm, in ways that they never would have had the ice storm not occurred. The recovery of trees is very slow. The forest will recover, but it may be very slow, and it may take an equivalent amount of time as the lifetime of these young people who are here studying the forest today.
If you would like more information on ice storm damage assessment, forest management plans, or financial assistance, contact the Department of Environmental Conservation at 518-897-1276 for Tom Martin at the Raybrook office, or 315-785-2263 for Dave Smith at the Watertown office. You can also contact your local Cornell Cooperative Extension Office or Peter Smallage, State Forester at Cornell University, 607-255-4696. Or check out these excellent internet sites on the World Wide Web.
As a forest landowner, these storms are hard pills to swallow, but it's important for you to keep an open perspective, to try to keep your options open, to remain flexible. Remember, forest investments are a long-term investment. They're a generation of investment. And these little blips in the ecological curve are going to hit you if your family is owning that woodland for hundreds of years. So live and grow by it. Try to keep your chin up and keep that forest land productive. And don't forget, it's your children's legacy for the future.
Major funding for Ice Storm 98, Reclaiming the Forest, was made possible by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Forest Service, caring for the land and serving people.